we've been doing. Let's set all of that to the side and let's be fully present together in this space. So create a little sacred space for ourselves wherever you are, whether it be in your living room or your kitchen or your office, and let all of your kind of worldly concerns and worldly activities that have been occupying your day, put those to the side so we can focus on the Holy Dharma and on our practice. And so, as we set this intentional space for our study and our practice, let's take a moment to set a very strong motivation. The reason I am coming here this Saturday evening to study the Dharma, to study my mind, is so that I can benefit others. It is so that I can progress on the path towards Buddhahood and experience contentment and joy and peace in my life along the way. But the actual motivation is to develop the wisdom and the skillful means that will allow me to be of maximum benefit to other sentient beings. My goal is Buddhahood. And so that is my motivation, to achieve perfect, complete Buddhahood so that I might be of maximum benefit to others. So really set a strong motivation. A motivation like this makes all of our activities spiritual activities, Mahayana activities. So we need to bring that motivation, that bodhicitta ideal to everything we do. With that, we will offer some preliminary prayers, starting with refuge and bodhicitta. We'll do this 3 times in English and then once in Tibetan. And then we'll continue, 3 times in Tibetan, then once in English, and then we'll continue with the others in English. Sangye cheran soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi jola pencher sangye drupar shok. Sangye cheran soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi jola pencher sangye drupar shok. Sangye chiran soki chonam la chanchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi drola pencher sangye drupar shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. So now we'll offer a mandala offering. It's traditional to offer a mandala offering at the beginning of a teaching to request the teaching, also to request the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It's actually traditional to offer one at the end as well, and it's called a Thanksgiving mandala to show your gratitude for the teachings. That's not really the habit we've cultivated here at CKSL, but we will offer this one in the beginning, and we will offer once in Tibetan and then once in English. uh, Sa 싶으기 조액싱매도 트람리랍리시 니데겐파디 사행게싱두 미테의어이 요큰 나만당싱라 주팔쇼 This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kam Niryatayami. We'll continue with praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. And then after this, we will offer the Heart Sutra. So before any Dharma activity, we want to try to align our minds with the two aspects of the path, the accumulation of merit, which is to say practicing method, compassion, bodhicitta, and then the aspect of wisdom, recognizing the importance of understanding the nature of reality, of emptiness. And so we try to cultivate both of those minds at the beginning of a teaching. And so this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha is specifically offering verses of refuge to the Triple Gem, and especially recounting the many good qualities of Shakyamuni Buddha in the process. And so this is a way to practice accumulating merit. And then the Heart Sutra is a way to align our minds align our minds with the idea of emptiness. So it's good to have both of those at the beginning of a Dharma session. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, the supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who were wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms' atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagwan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagwan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Mm. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomena. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell on the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to the unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagwan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying: well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagwan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagawan. And now the prayer to dispel hindrances. I prostrate to the gathering of dakinis and the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamarata Shadara Samaraya Pe, Akasamarata Shadara Samaya Pe, Akasamarata Shadara Samaya Pe, Akasamarata Shadara Samaraya Pe, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Swaha. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified. Shintam Kuruye Swaha. May all negative forces that are opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to the Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Great. Thank you so much. So today we are continuing our journey. We are continuing our exploration of mind training and the way that mind training can help propel us towards Buddhahood. It can free us from all suffering by clearly identifying the actual cause of our suffering, which is our self-cherishing mind, and then teaching us the techniques to overcome that self-cherishing mind, to subdue it, not just to subdue it, but to uproot it entirely, to abandon it. And this text by Dhammarakshita is one of the oldest mind training texts, also called Lojong, right? And it is written in the 9th century. It was brought to Tibet by Atisha, who learned it at the feet of Dhammarakshita, who is one of his 3 teachers. One of his 3 teachers that taught him bodhicitta. He had, I think, 151 teachers, Atisha says, but he had 3 teachers specifically that taught him bodhicitta. The most famous one is Serlingpa, who was on Sumatra, right? And then there are 2 teachers in India, Maitreya Yogi and Dhammarakshita. So as we continue our study today, let's first just remember some of the qualities that are described as being the qualities of an appropriate student, right? Whenever we engage in the study of the Dharma, we want to embody what it means to be an appropriate student. And this list comes from Aryadeva in his text, The 400 Verses on Emptiness. And so the first thing we want to embody to be a good student is we want to have an attitude of being non-partisan, right? We don't want to cling to a specific idea and say, I know what the answer is. I know that my side is right and your side is wrong, right? Now, that isn't to say we don't have confidence that the Prasangika view, as taught by J. Tsongkhapa, is the ultimate, the ultimate realization of the teaching of the Buddha. But it is to say that we don't come into a teaching, whatever that teaching is, with the view that everything I know is correct and everything someone else says is wrong. We have to have a non-partisan point of view so we can hear all sides. And even if we don't agree with whatever critiques come our way, then we at least have heard them with an open mind. And that allows us to observe our own positions, our own opinions, our own understanding of both philosophical and emotional truths in a way that's much more meaningful than just building a wall around our beliefs and saying my beliefs are right, they can't be challenged, right? So we want to be non-partisan. And then the next one is we want to be intelligent, right? And some might say that that's nothing we can do about that. But what we mean here by intelligent, and what Aryadeva means, or one of the aspects, is that when we attend to a teaching, and again, this doesn't just mean a teaching that you're attending in person. When you attend to a text or to a study or to an act of meditation, when you attend to that, you don't want to go in blindly, right? So by being intelligent, it means someone who is interested, someone who is showing that they are concerned with the material, they have an interest in learning it, they want to get to the heart of it, they want to learn how to bridge the gap between intellectual understanding and experiential practice. And so that intelligence isn't merely a state of their mind that you have to be smart, you must be this high to ride this ride. That's not what it means. It means you have to come in and be curious and be intellectually curious, right? Which is to say that you don't just accept everything at face value, that you allow yourselves to actually investigate the teachings that the Buddha taught, and you say, how does this make sense in my life? And are there edges, are parts of this maybe that are rough around the edges that I don't understand or they rub against me the wrong way? Why is that? And so that intelligence is pushing you forward. It's never letting you rest and say, okay, I understand everything completely. I don't need to learn anymore. That intelligence is pulling you deeper into the Dharma, right? And in addition to being nonpartisan, And in addition to being intelligent, the next is we have to be diligent, right? We have to practice a type of joyful effort where we recognize that there the teachings of the Buddha are vast and broad, and they're very profound and deep. And in order to fully bring the Dharma into our everyday lives, we have to understand as much of the teachings as we can, and that takes effort, right? It's not instantaneous. We can't just read these texts and immediately have experiential understandings of them. We have to put in the effort to study with them, to study them, to wrestle with them, to bring them into our meditation practice, to really think about them, to contemplate and meditate them in a meaningful way. So let's try to bring those three qualities to our class together today: that we're nonpartisan, that we are intelligent and intellectually curious, and that we are diligent, right? We're putting in effort. This text, as I mentioned before, you can break it up into two parts. The first part being the teaching of conventional bodhicitta, which is to say the mind that wishes to achieve perfect, complete Buddhahood for the sake of other sentient beings. That's conventional bodhicitta. And then ultimate bodhicitta, which is the realization of the nature of reality, the realization of emptiness. And the bulk of this text, the first 100 verses or so, is teaching us about conventional bodhicitta. And then within that, the section we're on now is looking at how karmic cause and effect can be, how understanding karmic cause and effect can allow us to identify the self-cherishing mind as it operates in our lives, right? And the reason studying karma, causes and effects like this, having a knowledge of it, having an understanding of karma and how it operates in our life is important, is because when we have that knowledge, it empowers us to live a meaningful life, right? If we, it's easy to say that these are the 10 non-virtuous actions. And so if you follow any of the 10 non-virtuous actions, you're going to experience suffering. If you don't really have conviction in the law of karma, then that doesn't mean anything, right? If you don't actually believe in the law of cause and effect, that engaging in non-virtue will result in experiences of suffering, then you can talk about the non-virtuous actions and virtuous actions until you're blue in the face. It won't actually change your behavior, right? And that, I mean, your mental behavior and your physical behavior both. You have to have some conviction in understanding how karma works. And so what we have the opportunity to do in this text is to explore karma, but not just karma, but karma, an understanding of karma that allows us to actually apply it to our everyday life. And that is where the mind training aspect comes in. And that's where the understanding of how the self-cherishing mind is the fuel that is fueling this cycle of rebirth over and over again, this negative karma that then it ripens into the experiences of suffering, right? So this isn't explicit in every verse in this section, but here, the first half, the analogy of the wheel of sharp weapons, that wheel, is the sharp weapon of our negative karma that has now come back to harm us. And what that means is when you engage in a negative action, you create a negative karmic seed, right? And then that negative karmic seed eventually will ripen, and you will experience that ripened result as suffering, or at least as a difficult environmental situation or difficult circumstances, conditions, right? Now, where self-cherishing comes in and how it shows this being full circle is the self-cherishing mind, right? The mind that says my happiness is more important than your happiness, that it's more important for me to seek out my own profit or my own gain, to seek out my own comfort, to avoid loss, to avoid discomfort, to avoid criticism, right? That mind, the self-cherishing mind, we are overwhelmed by it all the time. So based on the self-cherishing mind, then we engage in negative actions, whether they be any of the other afflicted minds, right? All of our afflicted minds, all of our minds of suffering come from the self-cherishing mind to some extent, right? So because of the self-cherishing mind, we engage in negative actions. Those negative actions then create negative karmic seeds. Then at some point, those negative karmic seeds ripen. And that ripening, like we said, is the wheel of sharp weapons. Now, that ripening is ripening into some sort of difficult or harmful situation. But again, the self-cherishing mind is the mind that actually engages those difficult circumstances and interprets them as suffering, right? Because it adds a layer of mental or emotional suffering on top of what are simply difficult circumstances. So, for instance, if I'm experiencing sickness, right? That sickness is a coarse type of suffering that I can't avoid. That sickness itself is ripening a negative karma. But then my self-cherishing mind that says, I don't deserve to be sick. Why should I be sick? This isn't fair. That mind then makes that physical situation, that physical sickness, even greater. The suffering becomes even greater, right? And so the ripening of our negative karma is the conditions. And then our self-cherishing mind looks at those conditions and is dissatisfied and creates more suffering. And as a result, we create more negative karma because our self-cherishing mind is insisting that the suffering experience is not fair. It's not something we deserve. We deserve to be happy all the time. We don't deserve to ever be challenged. We don't deserve to have difficulties in our lives. And therefore, it causes us to create more negative karma. And the cycle continues, right? So you have to see how the self-cherishing mind works at every aspect of this process. The self-cherishing mind is what causes us to create negative karma. And then when that seed finally ripens, then the self-cherishing mind looks at those difficult circumstances and reacts against them in a kind of violent way, which causes more negative karma. And so the mind training teachings often say we need to put all of our blame on a single point. We blame all of our suffering on this single point, which is to say, self-cherishing, right? And so seeing how self-cherishing acts at different points in the cycle of our experience of suffering is important. Now, the verses we're covering now are different examples of experiences of suffering that we have in our lives, and many of them we can relate to, right? And the way the verses are set up is they give an example of a specific type of suffering, and then they acknowledge what sort of causes, what sort of negative actions planted the karmic seed that ripen as this type of suffering, and then they offer an antidote. And the antidotes come in kind of two different flavors, right? One antidote is to subdue that negative mind or subdue the negative experience in this very moment, right? And then the other kind of antidote is to make sure that those negative conditions don't occur again in the future. And that is the most important antidote, is to make sure our minds align in such a way that we don't create the causes for this condition to occur again in the future. We're already experiencing whatever difficult circumstances or suffering we have in samsara right now that are the results of past karma we created. We can't avoid that. We're already experiencing it. But we can avoid how we relate to it, and we can avoid creating more negative karma that will continue this type of suffering in future lives. And so as we go through these verses, what I want you to do, especially when you study this on your own, with every verse, look at first, what is the negative action that caused this experience of suffering, right? How did that negative action itself come from self-cherishing? So try to see that connection. This mind that says, I'm more important than everyone else, how did that mind then cause us to engage in some sort of negative action, as is described in the verse? So try to see that relationship between self-cherishing and the negative action. And then when it talks about the negative experience of suffering that we have right now, see how the self-cherishing mind exacerbates that experience, right? Like I was saying, if it's the experience of sickness, the sickness itself is a coarse type of suffering, but then the mind makes it even greater, right? Because the self-cherishing mind doesn't want to be experiencing that sickness. So see how the self-cherishing mind infiltrates at every level, both the cause and the experience, both. And then lastly, look at the antidote that is being proposed and see, is this antidote going to help me right now only, or will it help me in the future both? And try to have an intellectual understanding of how this antidote is going to be of benefit to you, right? And most of the antidotes will do both. In general, all of the antidotes are either discouraging non-virtuous behavior or encouraging some type of virtuous behavior. In general, when you're experiencing a type of suffering, if you intentionally look at that suffering, whatever it may be, and you understand its causes and put a lot of effort into cultivating the opposite kind of mind, then that will subdue your experience of suffering. It won't change your circumstances necessarily, but will help subdue your immediate experience of suffering. And so you can see the type of antidotes that are subduing antidotes and uprooting antidotes, right? Now, the other thing that was explicit in the beginning of this section, but it's not as explicit in every verse, is one of the antidotes that is proposed is what's called Tonglen, this practice of giving and taking, which is this fundamental mind training practice. And the heart of the practice is taking on other people's suffering and giving away your happiness to others. So it's really looking at the self-cherishing mind and aiming right for its heart right? Saying, I'm willing to take on other suffering and I'm willing to give away my happiness, which is the opposite of the self-cherishing mind, right? That is pointing towards the mind that cherishes others more than oneself. And so that isn't always made explicit in every verse here, but what we can do is when we look at any of these antidotes, right, we can just apply a Tonglen mind to it. So if the suffering that is discussed is the suffering of, let's say, sickness, then you just have a mind that say, I'm willing to take all of this sickness, that of this type of sickness, onto myself, not just my sickness, but I wish every sentient being who had the karma that would ripen into this type of sickness, I want that to ripen on me. I willingly accept all that sickness and the freedom from this sickness, the good health that I might have cultivated, I give that away to everyone. So whatever this type of suffering it is that you're experiencing, Tonglen would say, whatever this specific suffering that's described is, I want to take not just my experience of that, but every sentient being's experience of that type of suffering. So you can apply this Tonglen practice to every single verse, even if it's not made explicit in the verses. And so that is another aspect of taking this mind training tradition and applying it to our experience of karma. And so the reason understanding karma through the mind training tradition is helpful to us is because it gives us it gives us very explicit meditative practices we can do in our everyday life, right? But B, it is showing us how our self-cherishing mind is interacting with our non-virtuous actions to create the experiences of suffering. So when you understand the law of karma and you have conviction in it, then you can see how your self-cherishing mind is, the one behind the wheel and is the one that's causing these negative actions. That it's not happening from nowhere. Your experience of suffering aren't just coming out of the blue. They aren't being bestowed upon you from some external force, but they're only driven by your self-cherishing mind. That's the farmer planting all the seeds, right? So you have to have a conviction in karma to be able to really understand that. And so with that in mind, I thought we'd start in on these verses. Um, Noticeably, we've been doing this text for a few months now, and we're about a third of the way through. So this whole section is the same idea, right? It gives an experience of suffering, a very specific experience of suffering. It recognizes that experience as the ripening karma of negative actions we've done in the past, which is itself this wheel of sharp weapons. Then it identifies the cause of that, or one of the potential causes, and then a remedy. So I'm really going to try to go through some of these verses a little more quickly than we have been, because I'd like to get through this section tonight, if we can. And part of the reason is we are hoping to do a retreat on the Wheel of Sharp Weapons probably in April. And so we need to finish the text before we can hope to do a retreat on the text. That's still in the works. It's in the, we haven't solidified anything yet. But if I take another 3 months to finish this text, then it's going to throw a wrench into the works. So I'm going to try to go through these quickly. However, don't hesitate to stop and ask questions if there is a specific thing that comes up that either you don't understand, whether it's something in the text or something I'm explaining. Questions are always welcome. We do try to keep the questions pertinent to the text, right? So if you have a secondary question about your own practice or about something going on in your life, if we have time at the end for Q&A, you can maybe ask it there, or you can always email me, and we can try to work out a time to discuss it outside of class, okay? So let's try to keep whatever questions you have to the text or to whatever is immediately arising, whatever doubts immediately arise as a result of the text. So with that in mind, I think we ended with verse 26 last time. So now we are going to go to verse 27. So hopefully these is on the screen for you, okay? When strokes and diseases strike without warning, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now we have broken our vowed words of honor. Hereafter, let's shun such non-virtuous deeds. Right? So here, this is reminding us that our experience of physical sickness and illness often come because we make promises to our teachers and to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and we don't keep those promises, right? So when we make promises and then we don't fulfill them, that is what this is referencing. That's the negative karmic action. So here, when it says our vowed words of honor, what it is talking about specifically are here, one of the words is samaya, that's the Sanskrit word, or damsik in Tibetan. So in general, a samaya comes from the tantric tradition, right? And they are these promises you make as part of taking tantric vows. But in general, any pledge we make to the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, or our teachers who represent the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, even if we don't have an official vow, right? We've made a pledge, and to not keep that creates some negative karma. So if you, pledge that you're going to study this text and you're going to attend teachings, and then, the teaching time comes around and you say, oh, I didn't get time to study today. I think I was going to skip the class tonight. Then maybe it's not a big deal. I'll catch up next week, right? You may not have promised to me or to any of your other teachers specifically, I'm going to attend this class, but you made a commitment to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, right? You made a commitment to yourself as someone who is engaging in the spiritual journey. And so you've broken that pledge. Now, it's not the worst pledge in the world to break necessarily, but it is creating negative karma, right? So we have to remember that when we commit to something, you are creating a mental action. And so then to break that, it has deleterious effects, especially when you make pledges to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and to your teachers who represent those. So hereafter, let's shun such non-virtuous deeds means let us keep our commitments as purely as possible, right? We protect our morality, we protect our commitments, which is part of the reason when we do have either bodhisattva vows or tantric vows, or even just if we have pratimoksha vows, vows of individual liberation, the 5 lay vows, we remind ourselves of them every day, right? So every day you should remind yourself of what vows you've taken. So the most common way is to recite prayers to renew your bodhisattva vows every day, and you can recite prayers to renew your tantric vows every day. And there are also prayers to remind yourself of the 5 lay vows as well. So remind yourself of these vows you've committed every day. That should be part of your practice, right? Because if you don't remember them, then it's very easy to not keep them, to not follow them. So this verse, along with the verse we ended on last week, are both looking at types of physical illness that specifically prevent us from practicing Dharma, right? So strokes and other diseases, here it's referencing diseases that create obstacles for us to continue practicing Dharma, to continue engaging in deeds of body, speech, and mind as it relates to the Dharma. So by not keeping our promises to our teachers, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, by engaging in this non-virtuous behavior of breaking our samaya, then it creates obstacles to our continuing practice in Dharma in the future. So then moving on, verse 28.
Venerable, could I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
What about promises made to non-Dharma people, like regular people that we might break? Those are are those covered in this verse?
So this verse, no, they're not covered in this verse. But in general, there's debate about whether a promise, if you don't keep a promise, is that the same as lying? And in general, we say no. Not keeping a promise isn't the same as lying, especially worldly promises we're talking about. If you make a promise to a friend or a family member out of a spiritual context, it's not the same as lying, but it's approaching lying. So you have to look at why you don't keep a promise. And there's a very good chance that not keeping a promise does accrue some sort of negative karma, right? That is possible, but you have to look at a case by case situation. Who is the object of that promise? Was the promise itself a virtuous promise to begin with, or was it not a virtuous promise? And these kind of things. So I can't give you a black and white answer, except to say that in general, when we make a commitment to someone, before we make that commitment, we want to make sure that commitment is in line with the Dharma, and then that we do our best to fulfill that commitment however we can, right? And that is in line with the teachings of the Buddha, even if it's not a spiritual promise and it's a promise to, a family member, a friend, something like this. Before we make that promise, we want to make sure that it's something we can actually do, right? And then we want to do our best to fulfill it. But that's not quite what's referencing in this verse, though it's a parallel situation.
Okay, thank you.
Venerable Lekden, which prayer helps us remember our vows every day? You mentioned that something.
Yeah. So, well, the the Bodhisattva vows, the most common one is the 14-line prayer. That is what you can use to refresh the Bodhisattva vows. Hold on. I can recite it right now. I don't always remember in English, but so the 14-line prayer.
Is there one for the lay vows as well? The 5.
So the reason I stumbled when saying that is that the prayers I know to remember the lay vows are included within our tantric prayers, right? So like if you take highest yoga tantra initiation, you have to do what's called the 6 session guru yoga every day, and that helps you fulfill all the commitments you've made as part of your tantric vows. And in the prayer we usually recite, it lists all of the lay vows as well, my pratimoksha vows and my bodhisattva vows and my tantric vows. um, so I was trying to think of a prayer that encompasses all 5 of them on its own, and I can't think of one off the top of my head. All the ones I
Okay.
know are incorporated into other prayers, so I'll think about it and see if there is one. But
Okay.
even if you can't think of a specific prayer, the 5 lay vows are very easy to remember, right? And so before, as part of your morning practice, you offer refuge and bodhicitta, right? The prayer we did at the very beginning of our class today. And then you can just take a moment to remind yourself of these are the 5 vows that a householder holds. I hold them in my heart, and I commit myself to following these as part of my spiritual journey to become Buddha, right? And so even if there isn't a specific prayer I can think of, you can just remind yourself of those 5.
Yeah.
It's much easier when there's only 5. Once you get to the bodhisattva vows, there's 18 root bodhisattva vows and 46 secondary vows. So remembering all of them individually is hard. That's why there are prayers to help us. And the same thing when we get to the tantric vows, there are generally, we say there are 19 samaya and then 14 root tantric vows, then a whole number of secondary vows. So remembering those all get a little more difficult. The 5 uh, pratimoksha vows of a layperson are hopefully easy to keep in mind. If not, then we have to work on it, right?
That makes
So,
sense. Thank you so much.
yeah. So we'll go to verse 28. When our mind becomes clouded whenever we study, this is the wheelish sharp weapons returning full circle upon us for wrongs we have done. Till now, we have thought that the study of Dharma lacked prime importance and could be ignored. Hereafter, let's build up the habits of wisdom to hear and to think about what the Buddha taught. This laziness here is so easy, right? Till now, we've thought the study of Dharma isn't the most important thing. That is itself a type of laziness. Exerting some sort of effort towards worldly activity is a type of laziness, right? We usually think of laziness as being lethargy, right, or procrastination. And that is a type of laziness. That's the main type. But the second type is having energy and exerting effort towards non-Dharma activities. And that is so easy, right? So this verse is reminding us that we need to realize the importance of studying Dharma. And just understanding it intellectually isn't enough. We have to actually be committed with some level of conviction, and that will then cause us to study. And the problem is, it's very easy when we study to feel like I'm overwhelmed. And by being overwhelmed, I'm not able to understand what I'm reading or what I'm studying. My meditation practice isn't going very well. So the mind becomes clouded whenever we study. This itself is an experience that's a result of negative karma, right? So when you're trying to study and it's just not working, that's not to say give up, but it's to recognize, oh, wait, the reason this is so hard, the reason every time I open this Dharma book, my head gets dizzy, part of that reason is because in the past I've created the conditions for me to experience this right now. Right? So that gives you context. It gives you context to understand that I need to exert more effort because I've created the negative actions and then the negative karma in the past that's ripening now as my disorientation. And therefore, I want to ensure I don't continue having this disorientation. Now, that isn't to say we should ignore the worldly causes as well. If you only get 3 hours of sleep a night, then when you try to study Dharma or you try to meditate, of course, it's going to be difficult. So, you want to have both. You look at it, if there are worldly causes, do your best to eliminate the worldly causes. But then if you're still having problems when you study, then this verse is pointing at the reason for that is in the past, you haven't given the study of Dharma the importance that it deserves. You haven't built up that habit. You hear it says the habits of wisdom to hear and to think. So what this is saying is whenever we engage in teaching of the Buddha, we should engage in the 3 activities of both study or hearing, and then contemplating, and then meditating on those topics. And so generally we say that there's the wisdom that arises from study or hearing. Hearing and study, the word itself means to hear something, but we generally interpret it as meaning study something, right? Because in the time of the Buddha, everything was an oral tradition. So to hear something means to study it. There's the wisdom that arises from hearing, there's the wisdom that arises from contemplation, and there's the wisdom that arises from meditation. So there's the 3 different types of wisdom. And we need all 3 of those combined, right? To make our practice get deeper and more secure. So by not doing that in the past, we've created this obstacle. So this isn't saying we make excuses for us, that every time I try to study, the reason it's hard is because I had this negative karma, therefore it's not my fault. No, we still have to put in the effort, right? So understanding the context, karma gives us context for why we're experiencing certain levels of difficulty. It doesn't give us an excuse to then give up on exerting effort to practice virtue and to overcome those difficulties, right? Karma allows us to understand contexts. It isn't an excuse to then indulge in negative behavior. I think there's a verse about sleeping. This, for me, when I read this verse, the very first time I had a chance to receive teaching from His Holiness Dalai Lama in person was when I was in college, and he gave a free teaching in Central Park in New York City. So it was huge, and there was tens of thousands of people there. And my undergraduate college was a few hours away from New York City, and we could drive for I think like 2 hours and get on a train, and then take a train for like 2 hours, and we'd be in Central Park. And the night before this teaching, I was living with a bunch of other students who were interested in studying Buddhism and practicing Buddhist meditation. The night before the teaching in New York, when we had to leave, my roommate got wildly drunk, like incredibly drunk. And I ended up spending the whole night trying to make sure he didn't act in any destructive way. He kept insisting he had to drive a car, so he kept stealing people's car keys and trying to drive, which was not appropriate. So literally, I spent all night following my roommate around and trying to make sure he didn't hurt himself or anyone else. And I didn't get any sleep. And we go to this teaching with His Holiness, and it's a beautiful, nice spring day, and we're outside in Central Park, and I fall asleep. The very first time I was in His Holiness' presence for a teaching in person, I fell asleep. Not for the whole thing, but for the beginning part of it. And so I think that, that obviously there are worldly causes and worldly conditions that led that to happen, but also that's because I created negative actions in the past that ripened that way. Now, sleeping through a Dharma teaching and having that lethargy at a Dharma teaching creates its own negative karma. So luckily I woke up and I paid attention to the rest of the teaching. But that was my unfortunate first opportunity to see His Holiness live. And it had to do with me experiencing the ripening of negative karma that I'd created in the past in this way. So it had to do with in the past, I hadn't given the prime importance to studying Dharma that it deserves. And that ripened into when I had the chance to study Dharma with a holy being, I wasn't prepared for it, right? So continuing with verse 29. When sleep overwhelms us while practicing virtue, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now, we have gathered the causes for obstacles hindering our practice of virtuous acts. We've lacked all respect for scriptural teachings. We've sat on our books and we've left texts on the ground. We've also looked down upon those with deep insight. Hereafter, for the sake of our practice of Dharma, let's gladly endure all the hardships we meet. So this one, think of how often we just aren't paying attention, that we aren't practicing a level of conscientiousness, right? So even, when you have a text, where do you keep that text? Even if, do you put it on your seat when you get up? Do you put it on a cloth? Do you treat it with respect? Because the teachings, we say that all of these, this is the actual teaching of the Buddha. For someone that holds refuge, we have to say that all the words that are the teachings of the Dharma are the actual Dharma. We have to treat them that way. So it's very easy to create negative karma in relationship to these texts, right? How often have we looked upon someone who is a great meditator and we've said, but they're no scholar, How often have we looked down our nose upon other practitioners, especially if we don't understand their good qualities? We say, we only look at them through our worldly experience and we dismiss them, right? How often do we not show the care that the Dharma deserves to the Dharma? We treat the Dharma as if it were a worldly object, both our practice of it and the physical representations of the Dharma in the world. And as a result of that, then when we try to engage in virtuous activity, it becomes very easy to, be overwhelmed by sleep or lethargy. I will say, sometimes you can't avoid it, right? When I was in Boston at the FPMT center there, the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, who gives away a lot of free books, they use the carriage house there as one of their storage facilities. So there are these giant boxes that are maybe 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter cubed, filled with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Dharma texts that were given away for free. And, they'd use that as the staging center to mail them away to other centers around the world. And at some point, I had to go rearrange the boxes because they weren't in order. And to do that, I had to climb on top of all these boxes because the boxes were stacked, I'd say probably 4 boxes deep. So maybe, 4 meters high, if not a little more than that. So I had to climb on top of thousands of Dharma texts in order to rearrange these boxes so they could be accessed more easily. And the whole time I was doing it, Nick Rebush, who is the director of the Lamesha Wisdom Archive, was just saying, imagine that they're floating above your head. Imagine all those texts are floating above your head, that you're not stepping on them. Which sounds very silly, but that's specifically what Tsongkhapa tells us to do, right? Tsongkhapa says, when you have to engage in actions that make you cross over the Dharma in any way, and also he relates this when in the Tantric vows, where you're not supposed to step over the shadow of your guru or of any holy object either. When you have to do something that is putting your body over a holy object, then he offers the mantra Om Vajra Vega Krama Hum, that you recite this mantra and you visualize that actually the holy objects that you're stepping over are floating above your head. That is actually Tsongkhapa's advice. So if you're in a situation where you can't avoid stepping your body over this holy object, then at least you don't do it accidentally. And you are trying to create the mental action that is not stepping over the object, but actually the object is floating over your head. So, this is really working on our ability to not be mindless, that we are very in tune with how we treat the Dharma. And due to some worldly circumstances, sometimes you have to do the best you can do, right? So things like when you are traveling, and you have Dharma books in your backpack, right? That's not the best way to keep Dharma books. But sometimes if you're traveling somewhere, that's the best you can do, right? Or if they're packed in your luggage where they're safe and they're secure, but then the luggage goes underneath the plane, there's nothing you can do about that. So you treat them with the respect you can. You make sure they're wrapped. You make sure they're protected. And then you do the best you can do. Though Tsongkhapa does give us this mantra, Om Vajra Vega Krama Hum. So that's a good one to remember. Because we don't want to, we don't want to create the conditions that make it hard to study Dharma, that make it hard to practice virtue. And so being disrespectful to the Dharma now creates the conditions where it becomes more difficult to practice virtue in the future. Verse 30 says, when our mind wanders greatly and runs toward delusion, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now we've neglected to meditate fully on defects pervading this transient world. Hereafter, let's work to renounce this existence and see the impermanent nature of all things. So here, when it says to our mind runs towards delusion, right? That is when our experiences of attachment or anger overwhelm our mind, right? When you see something beautiful and right away you covet it, you lust after it, you want it, you want to own it. When you see something that you don't like and immediately you have a visceral reaction of disgust or hatred towards it, right? Those objects of attachment or anger or hatred, our mind wanders to them without any control, right? So the very fact that our minds are overwhelmed by lust, by attachment, by anger, by disgust, that is because the cause for that, or one of the causes for that, is that we've neglected to really consider the nature of reality, right? That nothing exists the way we perceive it to exist. So here, when it says to meditate on the defects that pervade this transient world, that one means to try to generate a mind of renunciation, which we haven't done in the past. A mind of renunciation is a mind that says, I don't want to be stuck in samsara. I want to be free from samsara, and therefore I will not be attached to any samsaric delight, right? That all worldly happiness is only a type of suffering. And therefore, I will not cling to worldly happiness as if it were real happiness, but I develop the mind that wishes to be free from all suffering, right? So that is what it means to meditate on the defects that pervade this transient world. We haven't done that in the past. We haven't worked to cultivate renunciation. And since we haven't done the work to cultivate renunciation in past lives, that lack of action has created negative karmic seeds that ripen as our instinctual attraction to attachment and to anger and to other afflicted minds, right? Instinctually, habitually, we run towards them because we've created the cause to do that over and over again. And the truth is it says we've neglected to meditate fully on renunciation. We meditate all day long on worldly dharmas, right? To meditate on something means to become familiar with that object, right? To make that object inseparable from your mind. And literally all day long, we are following non-virtuous activity, right? We are meditating on non-virtue, essentially. We are allowing the 8 worldly dharmas, the idea of seeking out my own happiness, my own profit, my own gain, my own comfort, avoiding my own personal displeasure, avoiding infamy, avoiding bad reputation. We think about that all the time. We make that inseparable from our mind to the point where we don't even realize that we're chasing after the self-cherishing mind, right? So that's what we're meditating on all the time. And instead, we should be meditating on the Dharma. We should be meditating on what it means to be trapped in samsara, what it means that we are constantly clinging to things outside of ourselves as if they're going to bring us happiness, and how we'll never find happiness if we're always looking for something outside of our own mind as the way to bring about that happiness. Never. We'll never find true, genuine happiness. There'll be worldly happiness, there'll be temporary happiness, and that's fine when we experience that to appreciate it. But as long as we're grabbing onto that as if it were real happiness, we're always going to be dissatisfied in the end. Always. Because it's going to keep us circling in samsara more and more. And so we need to realign our practice to not meditate on samsara, but instead to meditate on how to be free from samsara. And that means how to meditate on renunciation. How not to cling to external things as if they were the meaning of reality, right? Here he adds in and see the impermanent nature of things. That is just adding in the idea that a lot of times when we cling to things outside of ourselves, we don't think they're ever going to change. That's why we cling to them so tightly. And then when they change, that just creates more unhappiness for us. But the truth is, everything changes, right? Nothing is going to stay the same. So these are the causes that empower our delusions. So we don't want to empower our delusions in the future. So we want to meditate on renunciation now. And you can see this is a good example of how meditating on renunciation now, if you're experiencing your mind wandering and running towards either attachment or anger, especially, then an immediate reminder of renunciation can help subdue that experience, and it also helps prevent it from happening in the future. So this is one of the ones where the actual remedy, it works in the immediate moment, but it also, more importantly, prevents it from happening, prevents those similar circumstances from arising in the future, right? Not all of the antidotes work that way, but this one does. Continuing.
Venerable,
Yes.
Venerable, sorry, so what is the antidote is reminding ourselves about impermanence. That is the antidote. You said it works as a preventive.
I'm sorry,
in the
I
present
didn't
moment.
quite hear you. You broke up. I didn't quite hear you. Here, the antidote here is that what you're asking about the antidote is let's work to renounce this existence. So that's the main antidote, to develop the mind of renunciation. And then seeing the impermanent nature of things can help us develop that mind of renunciation, right?
Okay.
So that's the secondary help. But the main antidote here is trying to develop a mind of renunciation. You know, renunciation, as I often say, to me, I understand renunciation as being self-compassion, right? Compassion is the wish for other sentient beings to be free from suffering that causes suffering. The wish for me to be free from suffering that causes suffering is renunciation. So we often talk about how it's difficult to develop a mind of compassion for others if we don't have compassion for ourselves. That's a very kind of contemporary 21st century idea of, self-care. And I agree with that. But I think that we have to understand what we mean by self-compassion. And what I think self-compassion means is the wish that I was not suffering anymore, and the wish that I was free from suffering. And another word for that is renunciation, right? So developing renunciation actually empowers me to develop compassion more strongly for others, because I'm able to look at my experience of suffering, and recognize how much I don't want to continue experiencing those. And then when I realize that if I'm suffering this way, all other sentient beings are suffering the same way. And similar to me, they don't want to experience suffering. All they want is to experience happiness. And so that wish for my own freedom from suffering then very easily translates in the wish for others to be free from suffering as well. So that self-compassion, which is to say renunciation, very quickly and easily leads into compassion for others, the wish for them to be free from suffering. So 31. When all of our affairs, both religious and worldly, run into trouble and fall into ruin, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now, we have felt cause and effect could be slighted. Hereafter, let's practice with patience and strength. So, I think we all have had these experiences, right? Where no matter what we do, it seems like nothing's going right, whether it be in our spiritual practice or in our everyday lives, our worldly experiences, that we try to do everything correctly and it quote unquote falls into ruin, which is very grandiose language, right? um, so we've all had that experience. And now it's worth, again, to use this verse as an example to point out when things don't go our way, that itself is just the condition. It's our self-cherishing mind that expects things to go our way, that expects all of our hard work, whether it be worldly hard work or spiritual hard work, to have immediate and tangible results. That self-cherishing mind is what is so disturbed when things go to ruin, fall into ruin, quote unquote, right? The falling into ruin, to not achieve our goals exactly as we had planned them out, that itself is just a condition. How we relate to that depends on what kind of minds we cultivate. So when things don't go our way, even though we put an effort to them, that lack of things working out for us, that is the ripening of karma, of negative karma, from disregarding the law of cause and effect. But the way we treat that is our current self-cherishing mind, or our lack of self-cherishing mind, if we've done enough work. So up until now, we have felt that cause and effect, the law of karma, wasn't that important, and again, this is why having conviction in karma is so important. It's easy to be like, well, that's just a small misdeed. That's not a big deal. This is what a lot of people, when we talk about the 10 non-virtuous actions and the non-virtuous action of speech, the slightest one is gossip, right? That's the least heavy. Idle chatter. And whenever you talk about idle chatter always being non-virtuous, gossip always being non-virtuous, everyone gets a little bit shy and they say, oh, but just a little bit is okay, right? I mean, I don't do it all the time. The truth is that mindset, that even a small non-virtue is acceptable, right? That shows that we don't actually understand the law of cause and effect. Now, that's not to say by understanding cause and effect that I can live the life of a perfect Buddha right now all the time, because it's samsara and I'm doing the best I can, and it's difficult living in samsara. But having conviction in the law of karma doesn't allow you to engage in non-virtue accidentally, right? Do you know what I mean? So it's very easy to just be like, well, it's just a small non-virtue. It's not a big deal. But if you actually understand if you actually understand karma, you recognize that even a small non-virtue can have an outsized effect, right? In the same way that an acorn grows into a giant tree, a small seed can have an outsized effect if we don't do something to prevent it from growing into that way. So we should never slight karma, right? We should never pretend cause and effect don't matter. So here, and it says we practice with patience and strength. So patience, there's generally, when we're talking about the perfecting of patience, we talk about 3 different types of patience. There's the patience that does not develop anger in response to harm or suffering. And then there's the patience that is willing to endure suffering in order to study the Dharma. And then there's the patience that is working for the benefit of sentient beings. And so here, this is specifically mostly referencing the second one, that when we engage in spiritual practice, right, that might cause us to experience difficulties of heat, of cold, of, when we're attending a teaching, sitting in place for too long of a time. Being willing to accept those sufferings in order to engage in spiritual practice is really important. It develops a mind of karma, a mind of patience. That's not to say allow our bodies to be hurt, put ourselves in danger. That's not what this is saying. But we should be willing to experience some level of suffering in order to continue our spiritual practice. And so that is specifically the patience it's referencing here. Not the only one, but that is kind of the most important one in this context.
Venerable, can I please ask just for clarification here? Is it specifically, the verse, is it specifically referring to the situation where we have already received the instructions, we have the knowledge of karma, and we anyways disregard it essentially, rather than not having an awareness?
Yeah. It's both, right? So, unfortunately, karma doesn't care if you believe in it or not. And so, if you have no understanding of karma at all, right? So either a non-Buddhist or someone without any cause of karma, you're still creating negative karma, right? You're still engaging in non-virtuous activities. You just aren't aware of it. So here, this is saying that when we don't think cause and effect exists, or we don't pay attention to it, then that action causes the ripened result of having our best efforts not result in anything, whether they be spiritual efforts or worldly efforts. Now, if you've never studied karma at all, and you never heard the word cause and effect, then maybe it would be a little bit different. But this is saying, even if you don't have faith in cause and effect, but other religions, they've heard the idea that all of your actions in this life have a consequence, and they say, "Oh, that doesn't matter. I don't believe in that." Right? So even if they haven't studied it in intensely, you've still heard it, right? So here you are right. If you've never heard the idea of cause and effect, that your actions right now have some sort of consequence in this or future lives, then that is not being referenced in this verse. However, you still create non-virtue, but maybe not the non-virtue that would ripen in this way. It's hard to say, as we mentioned earlier in one of the classes, that sometimes there are multiple causes that can have the same kind of result, right? So there are different negative actions I can do that might result in my all my affairs falling into ruin, quote unquote. So this is just one of them that it's pointing out, and one that we as Dharma practitioners can pay special effort to avoid, right? So then the next verse is actually in the very similar vein. When rites we perform never seem to be fruitful. This is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now we've relied on the gods of this world or on unskillful actions to bring us relief. Hereafter, let's turn in another direction and leave our non-virtuous actions behind. So this is talking about how we rely on worldly means to try to bring about super mundane benefit, right? That we think that worldly actions, whether it be worldly gods that we rely upon, whether that means we pray to worldly gods or we make offerings to worldly gods or depend on worldly gods, or other worldly means, we expect worldly actions to bring spiritual results, and they're never going to, right? Worldly actions are only going to bring about worldly results. And therefore, when we engage in spiritual practice, it may feel like whatever rites we're doing, they don't ripen the way we expect them to. Now, to be fair, we also have to not be attached to this idea of timetable, that, that idea that I'm going to, offer a puja for the benefit of me not being sick anymore. And then I offer the puja and I'm still sick. Well, that's not, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. If it was that easy, that'd be great. So we can't be too attached to these like timetables that we impute onto our religious activity, but we can have confidence that if I'm engaging with the best of intentions in some sort of ritual performance, whether it be a puja, whether it be reciting prayers, whether it be meditation, that I'm creating positive karma. And if I'm doing it with the specific intention to dedicate that merit to overcoming a specific obstacle or to achieving a specific result that is in accordance with Dharma, even if I don't experience that result immediately, my virtuous actions have been moving me in that direction, right? And they have helped overcome obstacles that I may not have overcome otherwise. So it's hard for us to, people at the monastery, all the time we're asked to do pujas, for people to do well in school or to get a good job. And then they always say, well, I want a good job so I can practice Dharma, or I want to get a good grade on this exam so I can practice Dharma better. And maybe that's true. Maybe they do. But it's hard to, just doing a single puja, even if it's a puja that your lama says this is important for you to do, you accumulate merit. If you expect a result immediately, a worldly result, then you're going in the wrong direction. But one of the reason that whatever actions you do in this life, whatever ritual actions, don't bear noticeable fruit is because you've created the condition for them not to do so. You've created the obstacles to them. And those obstacles come from past lives when you were relying on worldly means, as if those worldly means were going to bring about otherworldly happiness. So we don't want to continue doing that, right? So we turn away from worldly means. There are other translations of this text that say, I turn away from the dark side. Instead of saying, let's turn in another direction, it says, I turn away from the dark side. And that's because negative actions are all, the Tibetan uses the words black and white to describe a virtue and non-virtue. And so some people have translated this as, I turn away from the dark side, which I think is very nice. A little, very, very dramatic. So continuing, I know we're going quickly, but like I said, a lot of these are different permutations of the same idea. So hopefully I'm not going too quickly. If this is, then we can slow down. But we spent a few months on this, so I think we have a lot of the ideas down, and we want to just look at some of the intricacies. Number 33. When none of the wishes we make reach fulfillment, although we have made prayers to the three precious gems, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now, we have had an imperfect commitment to Buddha, whose teachings deserve complete trust. Hereafter, let's place our exclusive reliance on Buddha, his teachings, and those in his fold. Right? So this is saying that we have not had proper refuge. And again, this is building off of the last verse that says we relied on worldly things to bring about benefit. We've looked to worldly objects as if they're going to offer us real refuge, right? That was what we were talking about in the last verse. And here is building on that and saying we need to have complete trust in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha, which is to say the Dharma, and those in his fold, which is to say the Sangha, right? So we need to put our exclusive reliance. So when we have a mind of refuge, actual mind of refuge that distinguishes us as a Buddhist from a non-Buddhist, that mind of refuge recognizes that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha jewels are not only are they authentic sources of refuge, but they're the only authentic sources of refuge. But there's no authentic source of refuge outside of the three jewels. And we say that the guru or the lama embodies those three jewels. So sometimes we can add the lama on top, and that doesn't contradict, right? Because the lama is the embodiment of the triple gem. But as long as we seek anything outside of the triple gem as if it were a type of refuge, then we no longer have exclusive refuge, or exclusive reliance, rather. And as a result of that, then when we are engaging in, we have wishes, even wishes that are in line with the Dharma, right? Not worldly hopes or dreams, but wishes that are in accord with the Dharma. They aren't fulfilled, even though we work towards them, we put effort towards them, because we've already created obstacles in past lives to them being fulfilled. Part of the reason these teachings, these verses specifically, I find helpful to meditate on is because, I work hard to practice the Dharma. And it feels sometimes like no matter how hard you work, you're not experiencing the results that you'd hoped for. Or you look at some of your Dharma siblings and you see them putting in what seems to be less effort, but their meditation seems to be doing better than yours, or their understanding seems to come more quickly, right? And the reason for this is because you've created the obstacles, or you've created the conditions to have obstacles in your practice. And when you recognize that, you realize it's not the fault of me right now, right? I'm putting in the effort now, which is all I can do. I'm doing the best I can with my meditation, with my study, and my practice, right? With my study, contemplation, and meditation, with those three. I'm doing the best I can. And there are obstacles I have to overcome. And those obstacles come from actions I've done in the past. So at least I'm experiencing those obstacles now when I have the mind that allows me to cultivate joyful perseverance to some degree to try to overcome those obstacles. Because maybe those obstacles might occur when I didn't have this level of resilience, and then I would let those obstacles defeat me, right? So we can't look at it as personal failures when we don't achieve the things that we're hoping to achieve. As long as we're putting in the effort, then that's the best we can be doing. And we recognize that sometimes that the lack of achievements isn't because of anything we've done wrong, but it's simply we've created the negative karma that is now ripening as an obstacle to us having these achievements. And no matter how much hard work we do, it feels like it isn't going anywhere. It's important to remember, though, that every virtuous activity we do, it isn't wasted. So if my goal is to have a certain result, right, that result may not happen because of this negative karma I've created in the past that serves as an obstacle. That doesn't mean that there aren't virtuous results that are happening as a result of my current practice. It just means it isn't what I was anticipating or hoping for. No virtue is wasted. We should only be aligning our minds to virtue, even if we can't recognize the immediate result of it. So we should never think that this is worthless. My practice doesn't matter. I'm not achieving what I hope to achieve. I'm still, I've been meditating for however many decades and I haven't achieved a higher plane, whatever it may be, whatever your goals may be, worldly goals or super mundane goals. You should develop a conviction and confidence that as long as you're engaging in virtue, then your actions are creating positive seeds and that you will have positive results, even if they aren't the results that you are hoping to experience in this life. Right? So continuing. Now this text we're using, this specific translation, is very much in line with a commentary by Geshe Nawan Darge at the Institute of Tibetan Studies in Dharamsala. And it was translated by him and some of his students. And it's a wild translation. Like, it's very liberal with the way it translates these verses. And it's correct. Like, it's based on his commentary, but they're adding in a lot of his commentary material into the verses. So this verse is one of the ones that I've come across that kind of flabbergasts me. So the way it's written here, it says, when prejudice, polio, or strokes have us crippled, external forces or harm rise against us. This is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now, we've collected vast stores of non-virtue by breaking our vows, offending protectors, and in our practices from Guru devotion to Tantra. So hereafter, let's banish all prejudiced views. So the meaning of that verse is good and correct, but I'm going to share the actual verse to kind of point a little more directly. But here, if we just take this for what it is, it's saying that when we experience physical illness, a lot of that can be the result of external harm, right? Whether it be harmful spirits or other harmful activities that are causing harm against us, whether they be human human enemies or other non-human harmful spirits. And we experience that sometimes as illness, as sickness, or as other sort of disadvantageous situations. And the reason for that is because we have broken our vows to the protectors here, meaning both worldly protectors and our tantric deities, and we have not practiced mantra correctly. So the actual verse says, not to give a beautiful translation, but a word by word translation, it says, Nantok dribdang dundu langpetse. So when conceptual minds arise as demons and as harm doers, this is because of the collection of this is due to the collection of negativities we've accumulated in regard to the deities and to mantra. This is the weapon of our negative karma that has returned to us. Therefore, from now on, we will defeat all of these negative conceptual minds. So you can see it's a little bit different. But it's the same idea, which is saying that it's our conceptual minds that create the causes for us to experience harm from external forces, such as here the word is demon and harm doers, right? So it's our conceptual minds that arise as those demons and harm doers. And they cause us harm because we have created negativity with regard to, here it says, the deities, which deity it means, again, our tantric practice, but also just the Buddhas, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and to mantra. So what we mean by mantra here, the way the Tibetans understand the term mantra, is they etymologize it as meaning something that protects the mind. So in general, the mantras we recite, right, whatever the Om Mani Padme Hum, whatever we may recite, those mantras are ways to protect the mind. So they etymologize it as the Sanskrit word manas, which means mind, and tr, the verb to protect. So a mantra is something that protects the mind. In this verse, we can say that mantra really is all the Dharma. The whole purpose of the Dharma is to protect our mind. So we've created negativity with regards to Dharma practice, with regards to Dharma advice, with regards to our teachers and other spiritual leaders in the Dharma in our spiritual life, right? And so by engaging in negative actions with regard to them, then we've created the conditions where these negative conceptual minds arise, and we experience those harmful minds as demons and as other harm givers. And so the antidote is to conquer all of our nentok, all of our improper minds or our harmful conceptions. Here it says prejudiced views. That's not incorrect, but it doesn't just mean views as in like philosophical views, but in our minds that the minds or realizations that bring about harm to others, that are harmful minds. Anything discordant to the Dharma, basically. Any mind that's discordant to the Dharma is what we want to try to avoid, because it brings up, it creates the conditions for these kind of results to be experienced. I read this text a while ago, many, many years ago in Tibetan. And then since then, I have read it mostly in English, because the Tibetan can be hard. Some verses aren't clear because it's very short. The Tibetan, every verse is only 4 lines, and it's not many syllables. So sometimes you don't really have clear grammar connecting the different parts of the line. And so there's a lot of room for interpretation, which is why you have to rely on commentaries quite often. So this translation is doing a lot of work for us. It's filling in a lot of the meaning that is hard to pick out from the words alone. But I'd forgotten until just recently how much work they're doing in this translation when you compare it to other translations. So if you study other translations, you'll see that there's a little bit difference. And that doesn't mean one is wrong. It means that the teachers who influenced that translation were emphasizing one thing or another, or maybe they were following a different commentary in their act of translating. So it can be useful to see different translations, since we're given this gift of receiving these prayers and these texts in multiple languages at once. Never mind, this text was originally recited to Atisha by Dhammarakshita. Now, who knows what language it was recited in? It could have been Sanskrit, or it could have been a local language, a different language. And then Atisha, he recited it to Dramtompa in Tibetan. So that's the only version of it we have, is the Tibetan that Atisha recited. But he himself was translating the version that he had been taught by his Indian teacher, Dhammarakshita, right? So language and the way we use language to engage in meaning is very important. Okay, let's do a few more verses. I think we can go through a few more. And then we'll still have time for questions at the end. So 35. When we lack all control over where we must travel, and always must wander like waifs with no home, this is the wheel-sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now, we have disturbed holy gurus and others, and forced them to move from their homes or their seats. Hereafter, let's never cause others disturbance by evicting them cruelly from where they reside. So we don't need a permanent home to be content. Someone who becomes a monk or a nun, we openly accept homelessness, right? That's the term for becoming a renunciant, for becoming a monk or nun, is to adopt homelessness. So we don't need a permanent home to be content, to be happy, to have peace in our lives. However, when we don't have any control over where we're going, why we're going there, where we're living, then that creates a sense of dis-ease, discomfort, right? That lack of control is the important thing. When we don't have ability to actually govern where we're going, why we're going there. So it doesn't just mean being homeless. It can mean having to live with roommates we don't like. It can mean having to, stay in conditions that are not ideal for our work or for our practice, right? Maybe we have to live in a big city because that gives us access to our work, but that city is noisy, crowded, polluted, whatever it may be, right? So it's not just that we have to travel somewhere we don't want to, not just that we're homeless. What's important here is that we lack control over our living situation. And one of the reasons that gives rise to that is because in the past, we have forcibly evicted people from their homes, especially forcibly evicted holy beings and gurus. So now we should make every effort to not do that, right? To not disturb anyone when they're on their seat or on their home. So the flip side of that is we should always be gracious and inviting and courteous, not just to our lamas or to our gurus, but to all beings, right? We should never overstay our welcome, and we should never try to claim people don't belong in their own home, right? So let's never cause others disturbance by evicting them from where they reside. That can also apply to animals sometimes. Here it's specifically talking about holy beings, especially. But if you think that if there are animals maybe living in your backyard and they're bothering you, to destroy their home because you don't want them living there, it's better than killing them, definitely. But you're still getting some negative karma here. You're displacing them, right? You're causing them a disruption and you're displacing them from where they live. So let's create a negative karma for you to have obstacles about staying in places with complete mastery over your own, or autonomy over where you stay. So here, this section, as we end this, this section goes until verse 48. So these last verses are often talking about external conditions very explicitly. So verse 35 is talking about where we reside, our residence, and are not having control or power over where we stay. And verse 36 is talking about when crops in our fields are continually plagued by drought, floods, and hailstones, insects, and frost. This is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now we failed to honor our pledges, and hereafter let's keep all our moral vows pure. In Tibet, hailstorms are a big problem. You hear lots of texts about hailstorms destroying crops. When you live in an agricultural lifestyle, having one deleterious climate event can destroy your whole year's income, right? And so here, this is reminding us that yes, acts of nature have countless external causes, right? So it's not to say that this act of nature, whether it be a hailstorm or an earthquake or anything like that, is my karma alone caused that to happen. But my experience of that is a result of my karma. Those many external causes came together for me to experience in this way due to my karma. And one of the karmic causes for me to experience these external difficulties and to experience these climate events as problematic is I didn't keep my vows purely, and I didn't keep my pledges. So here, this is referencing not just our tantric vows that we talked about earlier, but also just my moral vows. So I haven't followed the 10 virtuous activities, and I haven't avoided the 10 non-virtuous activities to the best of my abilities. And as a result of that, I've created the conditions for there to be difficult environmental results, right? Now, again, this is really critical. Studying karma, when we say that my experiencing these deleterious climate events is karma, therefore I shouldn't worry about it, that doesn't mean that climate change isn't real and isn't man-made and that we should ignore it, right? So things like, it can be easy to be like, well, experiencing an earthquake or a hurricane, that's your karma. Therefore, I don't have to worry about my contribution to climate change. No, that's a misunderstanding of karma, right? We have to do both. We have to recognize that my experience of the world around me right now is due to many causes and conditions, some of which are man-made, some of which are beyond my control. So my karma is what's determining how I experience it, how I relate to those physical experiences, right? And it's also determining the environment I'm born into and what resources I have available to me that will allow me to relate to those difficult circumstances, whether it be a hurricane or a flood or a fire, right? That is the role my karma is doing. But I also have the karma that allows me the resources and means to try to prevent climate disaster from continuing to happen in the future. So to just say that climate disaster is inevitable and it's karma, therefore we shouldn't have to do any work, that is assuming that karma is somehow passive, that we should be passive actors in our lives and not actually full agents in our lives. And that's not how karma works. Karma doesn't encourage being passive. Karma encourages action, right? That's the karma itself means action. That's what the word means, action. We have to do something, right? So yes, we experience past karma as climate disasters. And recognizing that allows us to understand the context for experiencing climate disaster and not be overwhelmed by the misery of it and not create more mental or emotional suffering as a result. but we also have the opportunity to try to prevent future climate disasters. Whether that just be a plague of insects or hail, or whether it be, the climate disasters that we're actually facing due to man-made environmental climate change. Okay, what time? Let's try to do a few more verses. I know I'm rushing, but as I mentioned in the beginning, I would like to get through this section today, especially. So we'll see. If I'm going too fast, please don't hesitate to slow me down. When we are poor, yet we're filled with much greed and desire, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now we have been misers, reluctant to share the offerings we've made to the three jewels. We're reluctant to share. The offerings we've made to the three jewels were meager. Hereafter, let's give with a generous heart. So this is the result here isn't simply being impoverished. It's being impoverished and yet wishing or having strong desire and greed for things that don't belong to us, right? Seeing wealth, seeing others, possessions, and coveting them immediately, regardless of what we do or don't own ourselves. So that experience of instantaneous greed or lust or desire or clinging or covetousness, those minds, the reason they're so quick and easy to be generated in our continuum is because in the past we haven't practiced generosity appropriately, right? Whether it's generosity in a worldly sense or generosity in our offerings to the three jewels. So, there's different types of generosity. There's generosity of worldly possessions, but then there's also the generosity of Dharma, which is to say you share Dharma teachings and insight and practice. And then there's a generosity of fearlessness or protection, which is you help sentient beings who are experiencing harm in some way, right? So we haven't practiced generosity appropriately. And as a result of that, it is easier for us to lust after others' possessions and others' wealth. So again, here, this is one of the examples where the antidote plays double duty. Because if I recognize that I am immediately have greed or desire over other people's possessions, and I notice that in my mind, right? Then I can try to generate a mind of generosity right now. And that mind of generosity at this very moment will help overcome my immediate experience of greed, of desire, of covetousness. And at the same time, by generating a mind of generosity, I am preventing myself from that natural inclination towards greed or desire or covetousness in the future. So that antidote helps subdue my current negative experience, and it helps create the conditions where it helps plant the karmic seeds that will no longer ripen as this natural proclivity towards being greedy or towards being covetous, toward desiring others' possessions. And this is, again, offerings or being generous, not just to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which we do by making offerings to temples or to Sangha members, but also in all of our acts of generosity, right? To animals and to other humans as well.
Venerable,
yes.
Venerable, may I ask
sure.
a question? I see what is written about greed and desire, but why is it connected to when we are poor? You can have greed and desire even when you are not poor, right? So it would apply even then, right?
It would apply even then. Here, the verse is just highlighting yet that whether we lose wealth or gain wealth, that should not affect our happiness or our minds of contentment, right? And the truth is, as you point out, sometimes, at least the way it appears from the outside, is people that have a lot of wealth, their greed is even greater than the greed of people that have less. At least it looks that way. When you look at the billionaires that exist in the world, they seem to have an insatiable type of greed. So this isn't saying that, and in general, that greed, that longing, that thirsting, that craving others' possessions is almost always going to have some relationship to a lack of generosity. But in this verse, it's specifically pointing out that instead of being content with our experiences or our possessions as we have them now. So that's what it says when it says poor. The word in Tibetan doesn't actually mean like impoverished. It just means not having, not being wealthy, essentially, which isn't quite the same thing as being poor, right? So it's just it's making it more explicit that that we're not content with our current circumstances. But you're right. It's not just people that are impoverished that experience greed and desire. That everyone does, and it always, or I won't say always, but very often, is coming from lack of generosity. If I had Tibetan in front of me, I'd give you a little bit of translation. But here, it's just pointing out that, yeah, when we're poor, we're filled with greed and desire. So it's showing that relationship between lack of contentment and the fact that, if you're impoverished, to get out of poverty, or when you're experiencing poverty, you don't need a lot to experience a relief from that poverty, right? Not always. And yet, instead of desiring what is necessary, we always desire more than is necessary. So that's kind of what this is highlighting, that our eyes are always bigger than our stomachs, kind of, you could say, that we always are desiring more than we actually need to create the conditions that allow us to practice Dharma. If all we desire is to have the right conditions, whether it be terms of shelter or wealth or possessions that will allow us to then engage in a meaningful spiritual life, if that is what we're seeking out, then that's not the same thing as always wanting what everyone else has and having this like insatiable greed of wanting things that we don't need. I don't know. That doesn't really answer your question directly. The verse is, I agree that it's a little specific in this specific verse, but even if we're not poor, we should always be practicing generosity if we want to not be poor in the future. That's the short version of it.
Thank you.
38. When our bodies are ugly and others torment us by mocking our flaws, never showing respect, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now we have made images that are lacking in beauty. By venting our anger, we've made ugly scenes. Hereafter, let's print books and make pleasing statues, and not be short-tempered, but be of good cheer. So again, this is not suggesting there's any value judgment to having being not being attractive, right? This is saying that when we are born, or when we're in a situation where we don't have an attractive body, or maybe when we are experiencing some sort of disabilities or something like this, and we're tormented by others because of it, right? So this has nothing to do with the actual body itself, but others turning on us and treating us poorly because of how they perceive us. That negativity, that experience, is due to having created unpleasant images of the Buddha in the past, right? And specifically, this translation doesn't quite point it out, but the other commentaries say that when we've created images that are lacking in beauty due to being angry, rather. So like when we have allowed our negative minds to then usurp our Dharma practice. So when we've made images of the Buddha, whether we were drawing them or sculpting them or painting them, for some reason, our anger and our other emotions were riled up, and it caused us to then not make as beautiful an object as possible, right? So we were fueled not by a lack of skill, but fueled by our own negative minds. And due to our negative minds, our afflicted minds, then we created unbeautiful or non-attractive images or representations of the Buddha. And so because of that, we're now experiencing others mocking our own appearance. So again, the result here isn't the way we appear, it's us being mocked or tormented by others for it. That is what is being ripened in this. And so the way we counteract that is to do our best to not to reproduce Dharma, whether it be in book form or whether it be creating images of the Dharma, doing it with a very intentional mind, right? So not scribbling Dharma onto like low quality paper if you're printing out a Dharma text, or if you are going to like paint an image of the Buddha, putting your best effort into it and not doing, a lazy job of it, and not allowing yourself to do it with the eye that I'm going to do this so everyone can see what a great artist I am, right? So the goal is to always be doing the best we can for the purpose of celebrating the Dharma, not for our own personal goals. So that would be the antidote to the experience of others criticizing us or harming us or not showing respect due to our own physical appearance. Okay, let's do one more verse. When attachment and anger disturb and upset us, no matter how much we may try to suppress them, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now we've held on to the improper outlook, stubbornly cherishing only ourselves. Hereafter, let's uproot self-interest completely. So this is just reminding us that all of our negative habits are self-reinforcing, right? So when anger and attachment disturb us and they overwhelm us, that's because in the past, we have allowed our self-cherishing mind to take control. We haven't tried to rein in our self-cherishing mind. Here, this what it's called self-interest, right? And since we haven't done that, we've fed our self-cherishing mind. We've encouraged it. Then we've created the habit to seek out attachment and anger, right? To seek out those things that give us worldly delight or to avoid those things that create worldly disturbance, because our self-cherishing mind has led us down that path. So we've made it easier. We've created the habit. So all of our habits are self-reinforcing. That goes for virtuous habits, and that goes for non-virtuous habits. And that goes for this life, and it goes for multiple lifetimes, right? So that's what this verse is reminding us, that our past actions of allowing the self-cherishing mind to guide us and to, direct our behavior has created the habit or the pattern of then following anger and attachment and the other afflicted minds without even any thought, right? No matter how much we try to suppress them. So now in this life, we may realize how harmful our attachment, our anger, our other afflicted minds are. So we're actually exerting effort. We're doing the best we can to try to overcome them. And the reason it's difficult is because in the past, we haven't done this work. In the past, we've allowed self-cherishing to guide all of our behavior. And that has made our minds more accustomed to the afflictions than they are to the Dharma, right? So we don't want that to happen in the future. We want all of our practice to get easier and easier and easier. And therefore, we have to really exert effort now to be dissatisfied with the self-cherishing mind and to break all of the negative habits that seek out cherishing others as less important than cherishing ourselves. Okay, maybe we'll end there for today. Are there any questions? No questions. Oof. Okay. If there are really no questions, then maybe we'll try to get one more verse in. Okay. Let's see. So verse 40. When success in our practices always eludes us, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we've done. Till now, deep within, we've clung to our ego, fully immersed in our self-cherishing ways. Hereafter, let's dedicate all of the virtuous actions we do so that others may thrive, right? How often do we hold inferior views or harmful views about what it means to lead a meaningful life and not even realize that we do it, right? We think that worldly actions are going to bring about real happiness. And there are a whole lot of views or opinions that encourage us toward that belief. And we have held on to those beliefs or those opinions our whole lives, not just this life, but since beginning this time, right? And all it's done is caused us harm. So we want to avoid or prevent us from having these inferior or harmful views. And the way we prevent those from arising is by planting the seeds for their opposite. So instead of immersing ourselves in self-cherishing, we recognize that everything we do should be for the benefit of others, that others' happiness is more important than our own happiness. And all of our activities, we dedicate it towards bringing about others' happiness, both their temporary worldly happiness and their actual real happiness of Buddhahood, the relief from all suffering. So we want to make every single one of our activities pointed towards the benefit of others, right? So we say we develop a mind of bodhicitta, but we do it in a way that's not mere words, but is actually a motivating factor that guides how we live our lives and how we go about our daily activities. By doing that, then we create the conditions where we can actually achieve success in our endeavors. So here is the saying, when we engage in spiritual practice, but we don't seem to succeed in it, one of the reasons for that is because we've been so focused on our self-cherishing mind and not dedicating our actions to others that we've created the conditions that make it really difficult to achieve spiritual achievements, to accomplish spiritual achievements, right? So we want to prevent that from happening in the future. I think it's also important to have a really strong understanding of what we mean by success. So when success in our practice eludes us, how are we defining success, right? If we're defining success that is by having some level of realization, or if we're defining success by being able to, directly understand the nature of reality by next week, then okay, that's not a realistic definition of success, right? So our definition of success has to be realistic, and it shouldn't be easy. It shouldn't be like, oh, if I meditate for 5 minutes, I succeed. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying we have to be realistic. And if I am not if I don't achieve Buddhahood tomorrow, that doesn't mean I failed, right? So we have to be realistic about what we mean by success. That we may be meditating for months and months and months, and that doesn't mean we're going to achieve meditative realizations. It doesn't mean we're going to achieve shamatha practice right away, right? We have to have a realistic understanding that all of our virtue and all of our Dharma practice that's done with the correct motivation, it accumulates, right? And it builds up. And it makes it easier to practice virtue in the future. It makes it easier to achieve realizations in the future. And even if we don't experience the full ripening of that virtue in this life, what we're doing is creating the causes to experience it in the future. So we can't define success as only the end goal, right? Only Buddhahood, or only being free from samsara, or only actually achieving unfabricated bodhicitta. If that is how we measure success, then we're always going to be lacking. Now, that's not to say make excuses for ourselves. I'm never one to make excuses, but it is to be realistic, right? We have to have realistic understanding of what it means to be living in samsara and to be doing the best we can in samsara, and to always be working towards the goal of Buddhahood, recognizing that I'm not going to get there tomorrow. There's a lot of work to do. So I'm being gentle with myself, where I'm always pushing myself, but I'm not beating myself up for not being perfect. So that's also important, right? To have a healthy understanding of what we mean by success. But even when we are practicing and we don't feel like we're making any movement in the direction we want, one of the reasons for that is that in the past, we have allowed ourselves to indulge a self-cherishing mind, and we haven't worked for the benefit of others. So to help encourage us achieving success in the future in our spiritual endeavors, then we work now to banish our self-cherishing mind. Okay, so then let's end it there today.
Venerable, there
Yes.
are 2 questions in the chat. Can you
Okay.
read, or should I read them out?
How about you read them? That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so Alexander says, karma could be interpreted as a strong or weak trend, ? Because sometimes I see the results are very different depending on the circumstances.
So, all of the actions we do create karma, right? All of our actions. Karma, it just means action. The word karma comes from the verb kr, which means to do. Every one of our actions creates a karmic seed of some sort, or a karmic imprint. Now, many of them are very weak, right? Most of them are very weak, but others are more powerful, and they can be virtuous or non-virtuous. The way those different seeds ripen depends on how powerfully they were created, how strong the minds were that created them, how heavy the actions were that created them. So that right away shows how, like, what level of potentiality the seeds have, and then how those seeds ripen depend on causes and conditions. So the same seed can ripen depending on different causes and conditions and be experienced differently, right? So for instance, if I created a karma, a lot of these are talking about experiencing illness, right? If I created a karma to experience some physical illness, that seed can ripen when I have a nice home and access to food and healthcare, or it can ripen when I'm living in a war-torn country where I don't have access to medical care, right? Or proper medicine or anything like that. It's the same karmic seed that's ripening into me experiencing physical illness, but there are different causes and conditions that it's ripening as part of because it doesn't exist in isolation. And so my experience of that physical distress is going to be wildly different depending on those other causes and conditions, right? So karma, um, it isn't one specific thing happening. It is a number of causes and conditions that are coming together to cause certain seeds to ripen. And then how we experience the ripening of those seeds is also dependent on our karma as well, right? Karma is about our experience. Karma is about how we experience what's happening in the world around us. So every one of our actions creates a karma. Some are heavy, some are light. Some we can, we study purification practices. So when we know that we've created negative karma, we can try to, rid it of its power or of its potentiality to cause negative experiences, right? And in the same way, when we have minds of anger or other really strong afflicted minds, they can steal away the power from the positive karma we created. So all of our actions are planting seeds. How and when those seeds ripen depend on many, many conditions. So I don't know if that kind of helps answer the question a little bit. Is there another one?
Yes, there's one more question. May I read it out to you?
Yes, please.
Yes. So before that, Alexander says, yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
Okay. And Jyoti's question is, since karma is a very hidden phenomena, how does one relate to the inference that is explicit in the wheel of sharp weapons? Or is the text itself a scriptural testimony?
So when we say karma is an extremely hidden phenomena, the understanding of karma itself is not extremely hidden. What is an extremely hidden phenomena is how my experience of this ripening right now, this experience right now, is the result of this specific karmic action in the past, right? That direct experiential understanding is what is extremely hidden and only known by the Buddhas. So if you were to say, what is the cause I created in the past that is ripening as me experiencing this back pain right now, or this illness right now, or this poverty right now, or this desire to study Dharma right now? What is the specific action I did in a past life that is now ripening as this experience? Only a Buddha would be able to point that out. So that is what we mean when we say that karma itself is an extremely hidden phenomenon. However, the fact that non-virtuous activity creates negative karma that ripens as negative experiences, and virtuous activity creates positive karma that ripens as pleasant experiences, that isn't extremely hidden. And these relationships that are taught in this text are also not extremely hidden. The fact that certain actions have this class of results, right? This type of action will have a result similar to this because we know the different types of karmic results, right? We can have karmic results that are propelling karma. So the karma itself determines which type of birth we take. We can have karmic results where the result is similar to the cause in its experience. So when we cause harm to others, we experience harm or illness or sickness or some sort of physical difficulties. We can have karmic results that are similar to the cause and habit. So if we create the habit of always engaging in a certain type of harmful activity, such as killing, then it becomes easier to kill in the future, and our habituation with killing becomes second nature. So that is actually a karmic result. And then there are karmic results that are environmental karma. So when we engage in certain types of harmful actions, they ripen, or positive actions, they ripen in certain types of environments that we're born into with more or less freedom or more or less obstacles. Those types of karmic results as categories aren't extremely hidden. So those are taught and understood by different levels of practitioners. Now, I myself, I'm not able to identify those things, right? So I still have to take it on some level of faith in the teachings and in the teachers that profess these teachings. But those are relationships between cause and effect that, as general categories, are able to be realized by ordinary beings or by Arya beings as well. It's only the specific cause of a specific result that is extremely hidden phenomena that can only be realized by a Buddha. So this text, is written by an Indian master and then brought to us by Atisha, who taught it to Drum Tompa, only to Drum Tompa. Atisha only taught the mind training teachings to Drum Tompa, who was his heart disciple, because he felt the mind training teachings needed to be kept secret at that time and at that place, that they weren't for wide dispersal, right? And Drum Tompa only taught them to Geshe Chenghwa and to there were three students that he taught them to. And we can trace the mind training teachings through this handful of Kadampa Geshes that go back to Atisha. Because at that time, he felt that these teachings needed to be kept secret because they could be misinterpreted, or it wasn't an appropriate time for them to be made public. And it wasn't until later, which is the Geshe that I decided finally to make them public. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it wasn't until a few generations of students later where it was determined that it was an appropriate time for these teachings to be public teachings and not private teachings only, right? Which is why our lineage of them is so tight. We can look at this a handful of teachers that exist in this lineage. So this teaching itself, we don't consider it. It's not the word of the Buddha, right? It's not. It is a teaching that is in line. It is a Buddhist teaching, or a shastra, we'd say, a tenshit in Tibetan, but it's not the word of the Buddha. So it doesn't have the scriptural authority of the word of the Buddha, but it does have the authority that comes from being part of a lineage of teachings that we accept as authentic. Okay.
So Jyoti says, thank you so much, Venerable.
Okay, excellent. Okay, let us then maybe end it there for today. Unless there are any other urgent questions. No? Okay. So let's take a moment to recognize that we got through a lot of verses today, which I'm impressed by. I'm not good at going quickly through things. I have to say, when I was preparing, every week I prepare for these classes, and I look at other teachers' commentaries, some that are written commentaries and some that are records of their teachings of this text. And all of them go faster than me. And they're doing it in Tibetan, which is then being translated. So they only spend half the amount of time teaching that I'm teaching, because they have to teach in one language and then it gets translated. And they still go through more verses in a session than I do. But often it's because, our Saturday teachings, I'm teaching this in a very broad way. In general, we try to make our Saturday teachings for a little bit of our advanced beginners and our intermediate students. So there is some expectation that you study this text on your own in between classes, which is why the text is made available to you. And therefore, hopefully I can go more quickly through things, and you have already thought of different doubts or ideas from your own study and practice of the text in between sessions, right? So I'm trying to balance being as open and broad with the text as we can and making it as useful to our everyday life, but also trusting that as students who have been studying on your own, you've already done some of the work on your own. So I'm not always good at trying to find that balance, right? So that's why I'm going to try to go a little more quickly through this text with the confidence that you're doing some work on your own, because that's part of the idea behind our Saturday evening classes, is that you're doing some work on your own. And that doesn't mean you understand it on your own 100%, but that's the whole point of having class, is that if you have a doubt, you bring it to us to the class. But so hopefully I didn't go too fast for you today. We'll see if how we go in the future. With that said, let us remember or bring to mind that we have created some sort of merit through our practice today, some sort of virtuous karma. And instead of wishing for all of that to ripen only as our own happiness, we really try to cultivate the mind that cherishes others more than ourselves and says, I wish that all of the merit I accumulated today could ripen on other sentient beings. That merit I've accumulated through my practice, my study, my exploration of the Dharma this evening could ripen as other sentient beings being free from all suffering, that they might experience bliss of Buddhahood as a result of my actions. So we dedicate our merit in that way, that our merit may ripen on others, and that it may ripen as our quick realization of Buddhahood, so that we might be able to be of maximum benefit to others. And so with that in mind, we will offer a few dedication prayers. This first one we'll do once in Tibetan, and then we'll repeat it in English, and then we'll continue in English. Jianshu sem chorim poshe ma ke panam ke gyurchi ke panam pa me pa yang gone gondu pewa shok. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion, the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso, to you I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equaling the extent of space have happiness. May I and others without exception accumulate merit and purify negativities. And may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. Great. I think we'll end it there today. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I appreciate all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Venerable Lekden. We have teachings tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Please join us for teachings on Shanti Deva's text, Bodhisattva, Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Offering prostrations. Thank you, everyone. Ending the meeting now.
Thank you, Anshu.